Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well today. We're going to get started and I'm going to shut the video off because that's just using bandwidth, but I wanted to say hi. So today we're going to be talking about forms. So in this module we tackle the last and most inherently interactive of the major areas of HTML, the form. Basically, an HTML form is a compound element. It has a variety of tags that we're going to be using. The important thing about a form is it provides an opportunity for interactivity. So somebody comes to your website and they can give you feedback and also get feedback from you. So our objective today is to be working with HTML forms and their child elements. Look at how we can use a very simple server-sided service to process the form, and continue in our discussion of final project ideas. Okay? So the last part of that is that the page you will be creating today will be including a form that uses the form spree for post-processing, and you'll see that right now. So when we're working with forms, it is essentially the form tag is a container that holds a variety of form elements. Okay? The most important thing about the creation of a form, and this is where beginners have some problems, is everything that happens related to the form has to be between the open form tag and the closed form tag. So I'm going to move this over a little bit, make sure we have room for both of these things. Okay, so for example, and I'm going to open up what I'm doing here. So here's my contact page. So you see on my contact page, and I'm going to focus specifically right here on line 34. In my contact page, once again, you see I'm using an ID. So just to clarify, anytime you use an HTML element like the section tag, you can specify what that section tag is designed for. So section is a fairly generic type of thing. So I'm saying this section is designed to be a form. So the way I do that is I create an ID, and I call that ID, in this case, form, and then in my style sheet I have a bunch of rules related to form. But here's the most important part of that. When you use the form tag itself, anything related to that form has to happen after the opening of the form tag. So here's the form tag, and then of course the tag itself closes, but then everything else related to that form has to be happening before we close the form tag that you see closing on line 85. Okay, so that's the important thing to understand. Never put, and this is the cardinal error that I see students make, they end up getting their input button, which is like the submit button that the user clicks on, they end up getting their input button placed outside of this form tag. In other words, they put the form tag before the input button, and then nothing ever processes. So make sure that you are not one of those people who runs into that problem. Everything that you do related to a form happens between the opening of the form tag that we see here on line 36, and I'll even make this more obvious by giving a little space there. So on line 37, that's where my form tag opens. Everything related to form happens between that and line 86 where my form tag closes. Okay, so what type of elements are essential for a form tag? Well, the most essential element for a form tag is within the opening form tag, the method that you're using to submit form data and the action that is going to happen when the form data is submitted. So everything is contingent on what we see here on line 36. So we see the word form, and then it says space, and then it's action equal, and then in quotes, what is the action of this form? Where is this going to get processed? And we see in this case, it's getting processed by FormSpree. And then it's using my setup at FormSpree. You're going to create your own, and you'll see how to do that. Then it uses a method called post. So method means how is this data going to be transmitted? And the way it's getting transmitted is when you click the submit button, it's posting the data to this form. Okay, so this line here, if this works, everything else inside of it is going to make it a lot easier. Okay, what other things are we required to use for our form? Well, you'll need some input elements, right? Input elements define how the form data is processed. And generally we see radio input elements, checkbox input elements, passwords, submit, and reset. These are all forms of input elements, and these are different types of input elements. So let's see what that would look like. So if I go here and I say File, Live Preview, what we see here is, for example, this is a text input element, right? So it says input, and then it says type is text. Here's another text field. Every time I have a text field, I'm defining the input element as that type of input element, okay? As we scroll down, we see here where it says gender, male or female, this is an input element, but this is known as a radio button. And then finally down here, this is another input element, but this is known as a checkbox. Now, to distinguish between checkboxes and input elements, and the important thing to consider is that, I'm sorry, let me say that again. To distinguish between checkboxes and radio buttons, which are both types of input elements, a checkbox can have multiple entries. So you can see I can select all of these checkboxes, okay? Whereas radio buttons go back to the days of the AM radio, which some of you have no idea what that is all about. But basically, in the old cars, you had a set of buttons for your AM radio, and when you pushed one in, that disengaged all of the rest of them. So you can only have one radio button selected at a time. So radio buttons are used for when you only want the person to have one answer, yes or no question. It's either yes or no. It can't be both, right? So that's when you would use a radio button in the form. Checkboxes are when, if let's say you're making a sandwich for somebody and they want to have bread, mustard, mayo, and lettuce, they can put checkboxes in all of those categories. Down below that, any questions about text fields, radio buttons, or checkboxes as input types? Those are all input elements for a form. No questions? Okay. So let's move on to the next two types of input elements. And this one here is actually, this one's different. This is the select element. And the select element has the option, there are several options related to select. But what we see here, select is used normally for drop-down lists. Okay, and then down over here, we see we have a text area element. Okay, so these are the most common types of elements that we would see inside of a form. The last two are these two down here. The submit button, whoops, see, I just processed my form. And you'll see that later. The submit button and the clear form button, that's the reset button. So these are all examples of input elements, right? So we have input submit, input reset, input checkbox, input radio button, input text. Text. Those are all various inputs. Yep, it does seem pretty simple, and it really is. The most challenging part is to make sure that your form processes. So a couple of other requirements when you're working with forms. That clarifies, hopefully for everybody, input elements. And the next thing that's super important to remember to do when you're dealing with forms is the field set element. The field set element is used to group related data in a form, and the legend element defines what that field set is about. So when we look at this form, where did that go? It's funny how it launches experimental browser. There it is. When we look at this form, we see that contact information, personal information, consultant information are all broken out visually into distinct areas. And the way we do that is we take each set of data that's related to each other and put them in the same field set. So in this case, where it says contact information, I create a field set, and then I have the legend tag, which defines that field set. Then I put everything that's going to be part of that field set within their own tags, and then I close the field set. And what is responsible for the appearance here is my style sheet. In other words, I define a style sheet to have a border around the field set and a margin, so that way it looks like this. And we'll take a look at what my style sheet looks like in a couple of minutes. But from a structural perspective, the field set and the legend tell the HTML. This is when we tell the form how we're dividing the content in content that is related to each other in their own subgroups. So we have a field set with a legend of contact information, and then all of the form processing related to contact information. Then we close that field set. Then we create a new field set, and we see that that field set is related to personal information. Then we have form elements related to personal information, and we close that field set. And we create our next field set with content related to consultant information. Okay, so field set and field set and legend tags are important to define the content within the subcategories in your web pages. The select element defines drop-down or scrolling list boxes. Okay, so choices in a select element must be defined by the option element, right? So if you have an option, like if we see something like this, and then you have a selected value, that one is predefined as the selected element. Let's see how that plays out down over here. We see I have what is your favorite hobby, right? And I'll open up this page, and we see where it says, what is your favorite hobby? Well, we only see one of those, and none of these are pre-selected. Well, we can change that a little bit so it looks a little different. What we can do is go here where it says select name, and then fruit, and then give me 1 second. Select name, fruit. Select. And then I could say size equal 4. Okay, And then I can go down over here, and you'll see how this changes the appearance in a second. Selected value. So if now I reopen this page, level for size. Wait a second. Let me take a quick look back here for a second. Okay, just temporarily, I'm going to copy and paste this in, and I'll figure out what I did later. But this is, I just want to make sure we get this to work. So you can see how this process works. I'll save all and refresh this. Okay, good. So you can see here, file save all, and refresh here. There we go. Okay, so here's a couple of things that I want you to notice. When you use the select tag and you set the size, then what you can do is you can show your drop-down list as a list that you can see everything in. If this size was not set, then I would just see a single drop-down. But the other portion of that is that when you use the word selected, it pre-selects a value. So, and when this would be applicable is, let's say you have a newsletter, let's say you have a blog, and by default, you want anybody who goes to your blog and puts in your email address to automatically get your blog update email. So what you would do is you would have a category that says, what is, would you like to subscribe to this blog update? And the word yes would be pre-selected, right? So when you use the word selected before the word value, then that element within your list is pre-selected. So as soon as I take out this word selected, notice when I refresh here, after I save it here, when I refresh here, pairs is no longer selected, right? If I go over here and I take this size out and I save it, that drop down is pretty darn annoying. And then I refresh, now we only see a single one now, right? So you can see how the select menu is important to use. It gives you the options of creating drop-down lists and or scrolling list boxes, and the elements where it says size and then where it says selected help you to refine how we use the select element. Any questions about that? It's pretty straightforward. Then the text area, basically the text area defines a multiple line input field. You can use rows and columns attributes to define the sizing. So we see here in mine, it says text area, name is text area, ID is text area, row is 20, column is 60. So if I go to this page and I change the row to 10, and in this case I have to save it and refresh it, we see that it made it the selected simply auto highlights the word. That's correct. But it does more than auto highlights. Yes, it auto highlights the word, but if somebody just submits the form without making any changes, it sends that form data as their choice. So that's why it's used for things like subscribing to lists. And that's, it's opting, that's when somebody would have to opt out. In other words, they'd have to select no, because yes was pre-selected. Does that make sense? In this case, yes, pears would be your favorite hobby. Yes, that's right. And some people have pears as hobbies, so you never know. So, okay, back to the text area. Do we see how when we change the number of rows or the number of columns, it's going to change how that text area appears, right? So if I change this now to 100, not 1,000, and I change the rows to 15 or 20, and I save it, and I refresh. We see that? Okay, so that's how text area works. Now, the button element, it defines a clickable button. And we notice that when we're dealing with the submit and the reset, we're not using button, but submit and reset are another form of buttons, but the only difference is that button doesn't by itself submit any data. If we use button with some JavaScript, then we would see something happen on the page, or we can process some form data. But if I'm going to go File, Save. I'm going to go back to this page. I'm going to refresh this. You see right here it says click now. If I click on that, I have a little dialog box that popped up because I have an on-click command that is saying hello, right? So a button looks like a submit button or like a reset button, but what it does is it's a much more generic thing. Whereas a submit button submits form data, reset empties form data. But they are all three very similar. Buttons are similar to submit and reset buttons in terms of their appearance only. Okay? The HTML5 data list element, you're not required to use this for this assignment, but I talk about it here. Basically, it specifies a predefined option for an input. So users will see a drop-down list of predefined options when they provide focus for an associated input. Let's take a look at how this would appear on a page. So I'm just going to take my list of veggies, and right here I will put them into this favorite hobby area, and I'll save it. And I'll go back to that page, and I'll refresh. And we see I've got a drop down here, right? And I could, in this case, this is an input list, I use the data list tag to say this veggies is what I'm going to get information from, okay? And I could also set the size, I believe, for my input list. Let me give it a try. I'm not sure I can do this, but I think I can. I'll go File, Save, and I'll refresh. Oh, I guess that doesn't work. Let me try one more thing. Let me move this over. This is what happens when you experiment live. Okay, so I'll go to my data list. I'll pop that there. I'll go File, Save again. I'll hit refresh. Nope, that didn't do it. One other thing I want to try, let's see if I can pre-select a value. And I'll save. I'll refresh. And when I go down here, nope. So data lists work different than I was expecting. I don't use data lists that often. That's why I was experimenting with selected and size. And they apparently are not applicable to data lists as they are to selected tag. Okay, so but that's data list, and as I said, that's not required for this assignment. HTML output, this represents the container to hold calculations such as mathematical operations. We're not going to be working with that either. And then there are a variety of input elements that I already talked about with you, but there are additional ones that start making things a lot more interactive. Again, this being an intro class, we're not going to require any of these to be used, but if you want to start exploring working with input elements, you see a variety of types of input elements that you can copy and paste into a form and see the results of it, right? So those are the input elements. So let me get to the next page and make sure that it's really clear what you have to do. I'm going to skip this advanced only drop downs for a second and go to the assignment page so it's really clear how this form page is going to work. So in this class, we've talked about forms. We're going to continue working on our final project. You're going to create a forms page that includes a fully functional web form using the form tag, the text input type, the radio input type, the checkbox input type, submit input type, and the reset input type, as well as the select and option tag, the text area tag, making sure to use label, field set, and legend in all areas of your form. Now, you will notice I talked about field set and legend. I didn't talk about label. Basically, when we use label, we're defining that content so that when it comes back to a form, you have information where that content was coming from. So like here, it says, what is your favorite hobby? When we use the label tag and we say for size, then the information that, and this word size doesn't make the most sense here, so let me find a better one. Let me go back and get rid of some of these things that are in this form that shouldn't be there. Okay. Okay, here we go. So where it says, what is your favorite hobby? I'm using the label and I'm putting what is your favorite hobby inside of that label. And then I'm using the word for, which is saying the information I get is going to be related to this topic. That is going to come in the form that gets processed. So all of these tags are required. The label is a tag, field set is a tag, and legend is a tag. Now, setting the form's method and action to use the formspree.io service for post-processing and delivery of the form to you via email. And the way we do that is we make sure that here at the top in our form, right there where our form starts, we include this information in the action. Basically, we point to FormSpree and we use our email address. And then when we first process our form, we get a message from the form stating that you have to validate your email address. So let's take a look at exactly how that processes. So here I've got my form. I'm going to refresh this. Let me resave this over here. File save. I'm going to refresh. Okay. So here we've got our form. And at the very bottom where it says submit feedback, this is connected to that. It says form. The action of the form is that this information is going to be posted to this website to my email address. Okay? Now, of course, you would put your email address here. Okay, well, after I go over this, like I said, I'll have plenty of time to walk you step by step through it after I finish. So this form, remember, forms are processed content. We have a form. It has to be sent to someplace to process it. So we're attaching the URL, the address of where that form is going to be processed, and we're using our own email address for that, and we're saying this content is going to be posted when we click on the submit button and sent to this website. So down here at the bottom where it says submit, it's going to take that information and it's going to send it there. So when you first use this on your page and you use your email address, when you test it, you have to test your form. You'll see this message, submit feedback. And then it says almost there, I'm not a robot. You click on that and then you have to verify, you know, this is what happens when you've got a free service. We have to verify which of these pictures have crosswalks in them, and then I click verify, and street signs, more street signs, fine. Yeah, I guess that one does too. Okay, then it says form submitted successfully. The first time you do that, because I've done this before, the first time you do that, you will get an email that says you have to verify your email address. So when you create your form and you use this information right here, form action, http://formspree.io, your email address, not mine, right? When you do that, the first time you do it, you'll get a message that says you need to verify your email. And you'll see that now that I've changed that, take a look at what happens. File, save, and I'll go back, and I'll refresh this. And now when I click submit feedback, it says email address is not formatted correctly. So let's say okay, I'm putting a bogus email address in there. I just want you to see what happens. So I'll refresh, I'll click submit feedback, and it says confirm your email. We've sent a link to your email. To prevent spam, you'll have to confirm your email before things start working. So that's why it's very important to use the form action here. And this information in terms of form action will be on the assignment page. Okay, so you're not going to have to worry about memorizing that. But that's how the form gets processed. You use all of these tags, and then you process the form. And I'm going to add that right here where it says set the forms method and action, use the forms free service, and I'll have the specific line that you use right there. Okay? And essentially what you're doing with this page is you're going to make sure that it's connected to that style sheet that you made last week. Okay? So really, it's the style sheet, there's really nothing new to the style sheet. You've already been using a style sheet. So make sure that the form page that you create is now dialed into that same style sheet. When you look at my style sheet for this assignment, you will see that I've added some rules related to my form. Right here, form-related rules starting on 199. Okay, I have a legend rule. It set my font size. It set my color. It puts that margin around it. I have my field set that puts that nice border. That's what's responsible for making, let's go here. That's what's responsible for making, right here where it says legend, that's my font size for legend, right? Color, and then font family, and then the margin underneath it, that's what's giving me a little space. The field set, right? That's what's responsible for this box being around each of these areas. The text area, we can see the maximum width is set to be 98%, right? I could set a specific width as well. So if I go width 96%, and I go File, Save, then when I refresh this, File, Save All, then this page is my contact page, and I'll go, oh, I'm doing it in the wrong place. This is on my computer. This is up on the web. So if I went over here and I went to my style sheet and I went down to my form rules, and I set my text area to be a width of 96%, and I save this, and I refresh this, well, that's not that surprising. I'm going to run this page, and I'll open it. And now we go contact, and we see that text area should be 96% now. But that's where you would change it. That's where your rules are located. Specific rules. Basically what you're doing is you're adding your form-related rules to your existing style sheet for your final project. And the only rules that I've added are legend, field set, and text area there. You can style your input submit button and your input reset button if you wanted to, but that's not required. But you want to make sure that specifically when it comes to like your specific sub-regions of your page, that it's clear that they're separate from each other. That makes it a lot easier to do. Okay? So that's what's required for that part of the assignment. The other part of the assignment is what I'm going to show you right now. And that's related to drop-down menus. So we're going to go back a step. And while this part looks a little complicated, it's pretty straightforward when you practice with this code open over here. There's a lot of interactive user interfaces that people use on website that uses a combination of HTML and CSS. We're basically looking at the two most simple types of drop-down menus. And one is a drop-down menu when people hover over a link and you see like some sub-choices, right? That's one type of drop-down menu. Another type of drop-down menu is when somebody clicks on a link and then they see the sub-menu. Now, here's the cool thing. If you want to really see how this works, you simply click here where it says Edit on Code Open. You'll see both the HTML for the content that you see right over here, and you'll see the CSS. The main thing that you want to do is you want to think about how your page works, and you want to find one page where you are going to have a drop-down menu. What is the essential element of a drop-down menu? The essential element of a drop-down menu is where you have a list item. You see, this is a list item, this is a list item, and this is a list item, right? But then for one of those list items, you have an entire separate unordered list. So I'm going to make a couple of changes here so this is much more obvious to you. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of this. And notice I have 3 main list items. Menu 1, Menu 2, and Menu 3. And then within that set of list items, I've got in Menu 1 another unordered list. So this second unordered list, you know, the way lists works is it's all unordered list, right? When you start with a list, it's an unordered list. Then you have your list items in it. So when we see Menu 1, 2, and 3, this is an unordered list with those list items. But in this case, on Menu 1, we have another unordered list. Think of that as a sub-list, right? Inside of that sub-list, I have another set of list items. That's how we create, from the HTML point of view, a drop-down. Now, from a CSS point, does that make sense to you all? That this is just an unordered list within a list item, right? It's like a sublist, just like in an outline on a Word document. Okay, so that being the case, when we want to get that to appear, what we have to do is we have to control that with our styling, right? And basically what we're doing here, the most important part of this is we're creating our master unordered list as an inline block and then no list type. That means no little button to the left, right? No margin, no padding. And then we're saying the list item itself, that's these, 1, 2, and 3. These list items are going to have their position be relative, okay? And then the unordered list within that list item by default is not going to display, okay? And its position is going to be absolute. Now this goes back to week 10 where we started talking about positioning. We talked about static, we talked about relative, we talked about absolute. If the drop-down menu doesn't make sense to you, you should revisit that week so you can remember the concepts related to position, right? But basically, by default, you do not see this second list item. The only time we see it is when we hover over a list item that has a drop-down. So when we hover over this, nothing happens because there's no sublist there. When we hover over this, there's nothing because there's no sublist there. But when we hover over this, there is a sublist. So now we are displaying that sub-unordered list. And then we see all of these links. Okay, here's how it appears on my page. If I go to my cycling page, or if I go to my index page or any of my pages, you'll see when I roll over cycling, I see link 1, link 2, link 3, and link 4. That's because on that page, I have a sub-unordered list. That's part of my cycling list item, right? By creating a sub or unordered list, when I get to this page, when I get to any of my pages, that sub-unordered list is invisible until I hover over a list item that has a sub-unordered list. And then it appears like that, okay? The best way to get a good handle on this is simply go to this page, right? Click on Edit and just experiment to see how it works. You can change the code and you can see it operational right here. So if I went back to here and I put the old code back in here, then all of a sudden I could see all 3 of these having the list items. So this is your great experimental yes, that's how they do it, Max. This is your great place to experiment with drop-down menus. Now, I spent some time making sure that my drop-down menus had the colors that I wanted, and also when I'm working in a small page view, like on a phone, when I roll over cycling, I made my links only half the width so they were clear that this was related to this drop down here, right? I would probably spend a little bit more time here changing the colors of these, making them clearly a submenu for that cycling page. But it's really a matter of experimenting with the hover-only drop-down menu. So let's finalize what it says for this week's assignment. So you're just going to play with that stuff here when it's related to drop-down menus using nested lists, right? So let's finalize what we see here. This week, class 14, you're revising your multi-column page design and you're adding your HTML form to one of the pages for your final project site, okay? Next week, you're going to add this interactive drop-down menu. So you can experiment with it today, but you don't have to have it mastered today, okay? But I do want you to experiment with it, and I want you to understand that next week, you're going to need to include that, okay? So you don't have to stress too much about that because that's not due for this next class. But what is due for the next class is creating your form. And as I said, right over here where it says set the forms method and action to use the formsfree.io service, I'm going to put the exact code that you're supposed to use right over here. And you must test it in order to get credit for the form working. Okay? So that's pretty much it. You can see all of the rest of the instructions are specified right down here. Once you have this one line of code for your form method, this should be pretty easy. And you can obviously see how form elements work when you review this movie, right? You can see how this page has a set of basic form elements, and they're all listed right inside of that form tag, right? Nothing that complicated about this. Everything you see highlighted here on the right are the required forms that you're going to use here. Okay? Well, I exceeded the time that I usually use for the class because we got started a little late. I want to give you a moment if you have any questions related to this. Now, if you have other questions, I'll deal with those questions during my office hour time. But I want to make sure if you do have questions related to the form or questions related to getting started with the hover menu, that I answer them now. Any questions related to that stuff? The forms are only done in HTML. The form tags, yes. Everything related to the form is HTML. Everything related to the appearance of the form, of course, is CSS, right? So in other words, if I took out the CSS related to that form, let's take a look at what that would look like. Here we are, teacher demo. I'm going to temporarily take out this. And I'll go File, Save All, and I'll refresh this page. Oh, come on. That's not how it's going to look. Let's make sure we see how it's going to look. That would be the contact here, and we'll run this page. Module 14. There's module 14. There's my contact. I took out, let's see, style. Make sure I took out everything related to form. Sometimes the web pages don't release this is not related to form, so don't worry about that. Tablet layout, desktop layout, nothing else related to form. Okay, I'll go File, Save All. And let me try to run this one more time. We shouldn't see boxes around that at this point because I removed that. But basically the styling is supposed to, this only happens, when I'm recording. But if you take your styling out, then your form should just look like a plain vanilla page, right? Maybe it's getting this from the wrong place. Let's see, let me try one more thing here. Let's see if we see form down in here. No, it's not there. And my form is still showing up with that styling. So that shouldn't show up with any styling at this point. Anyway, your forms are controlled. One thing I found in brackets is that during live preview, you can hold the refresh button, select different options such as clear cache. Yeah, clearing cache is certainly an important thing to do, but right now we're not in brackets. We're on the Cloud 9. In any case, back to Eric's question, forms are done in HTML and the styling of the form is the responsibility of the CSS. Okay, any other questions related to the form? What's due for next week? One page, right? A single page, single form page. Now, I save this again, and I bet you there's no difference to the appearance of my form. Oh yeah, a little bit. It made a little change to it. So, that's basically, though, your field set is the box around it. The legend is the title of that box. The text area is the size down here. That's the only thing I've done to the form here. Lots more to do with forms. If you wanted to do experimenting with forms, let's do styling forms with CSS3. You can see tons of great pages where you see forms that are styled very nicely. And let's see if I can find one that's a good example. Well, there's a whole ton of them right there where you can just kind of experiment with. They give you the code and you can experiment with the styling, right? But in terms of seeing one that's already nicely styled, and then here's one where you see it's got a bunch of tabs to it, right? Here, number 3, where you see various colors. So this is a pretty neat one. I think you guys would like this one. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it so you can play with the styling of forms. Form number 4, now you're starting to get some kind of interesting looking form things happening. Okay? Any other questions related to forms? Any other questions related to this week's assignment? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this. Does it have to be capable of submitting emails to me? Yes, when you're, it's not submitting emails to you. When somebody fills out this form, it gets sent to this email address. I'll show you that right now, and this will be the last thing we do. So let me get to my code to make sure this is going to work the way I expect it. in my form tag, it says forms for jdimond.santarosa.edu. Okay, so I'll show you exactly how this gets processed. I'm going to fill out this form real fast. Okay, it's got some content information in there. Boom, boom, boom. This is just too cool. Okay, I'll click on Submit Feedback. And now it says confirm your email. Okay, so I go to my email because this is the first time I've used this form this semester. And in my email, so the first time you use the form, you'll have to make sure to process it. So it says here, confirm my form, and I'll click on this. And now it's going to say email has been confirmed. Good. So now when I go back to that site, when I go back to my site, and I fill this out again, and I say this, and this is just too cool. Now that it works, I'll click on Submit Feedback, and I say I'm not a robot. And now, when I go to my email, I should get an email, and it hopefully will pop up in the next 10 or 20 seconds, and I'll open the email, and you'll see the information that got sent to me was the information that was in this form. So this information should show up in my email any second now. Well, it didn't come in yet, but here's the way I know that your form is working. When I click on Submit Feedback, if it says to me, you have to confirm your email, that means you didn't confirm yours. If it says to me, prove that you're not a robot, that means you did what you were supposed to do, right? So the first time you test your form in Cloud9, it's going to have you confirm your email address. Once you confirm your email address, then you're going to be able to have your form processed, and it's going to send that data to your email address as it's listed there, right? Okay, that's the thing that we're looking for to make sure that your form works. Okay, okie doke, I'm going to end this recording, and I'm going to stay in this room for as long as it takes to answer any other questions. I'm going to have another student's going to be coming in the room as well from some other classes. So we're going to have some busy time here. And this recording will be posted momentarily right after my office hours. Thanks a lot.